What's up troops, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and today we're going to be talking about the time to kill in Battlefield 5. Now this is a very important topic recently, lots of people have been talking about it, you guys have seen me talk about it on Twitter too, and I think I've had enough time with the actual time to kill now to really make an informed decision about what we're talking about here, and really make some relatively decent criticisms without sounding too weird, I think the best way is about it. And I've delayed this video for a while because I really have given it a go, you know, I didn't want to just jump the gun, you know, I was very upset when I found out about this, a lot of you guys would have seen the tweets, but I was willing to give it a try, and I think that was worth doing in order to really come to an informed decision about what has happened. So for those of you who don't know, for a quick rundown, the time to kill in Battlefield 5 has been increased. Weapons that were previously 3 or 4 bullets are now 5, weapons that maybe were 5 bullets are now 6, and weapons that were 6 bullets are now 7. A good example would be that the Lewis gun is now like a 7 bullet time to kill, or 6 bullet time to kill depending on ranges. SMGs have also rapidly changed, some of the rifles have changed. The only thing that hasn't really changed are snipers and shotguns. And today I want to address everything that's going on in this decision-making process and what's happening with time to kill, and I'm going to talk about it objectively, and then I'm going to talk about it subjectively. I'm going to talk about my opinions afterwards. And from an objective standpoint, there are some criticisms that I have, and let's just roll on into it. So the time to kill has been changed, and the only two real objective criticisms I have about this is about the data that they've used to make this decision, but also, more importantly, how they've communicated this decision and what they've done about it. So let's start with the data. Now this is something which doesn't make a lot of sense on a few fronts. Now the reason they've given for changing time to kill is to do with 1, player churn rate, which I'll talk about later on in the video, but 2, the fact that players aren't reacting to being killed enough in the game. They seem to be dying quickly and there's no reaction time, they're not shooting back, they're not contesting kills. And this has all been pinned on time to kill, but there are so many other glaring issues in the game which clearly would affect this data. For starters, we have time to death issues. The blog post seems to relatively glaze over this. It says like, oh, time to kill and time to death are heavily intertwined. Almost kind of saying that like they needed to increase the time to kill to change the time to death experience. And to some degree that is of course true. You know, naturally if we're taking more damage, or if we're taking less damage, we will notice that when we're shooting at people and when we're receiving damage as well. You'll probably notice if you've been running around in the new game modes, that if you're a sniper, you'll probably be living a little bit longer than usual. But there are so many other things that can change this problem. There are so many other things than time to kill that would make a player not react. For example, there is a severe lack of visibility in Battlefield 5. It is difficult to see players. I won't be able to react to a player if they're blending in with the rubble in Devastation of Rotterdam, or if they're hiding in the tall grass in Arras, and that's fine in some respects to use concealment, but there are more sort of basic principles where players just seem to be blending into the mesh and colour palette of the game more than they should be, and some of that has been addressed with ring lighting as we've seen in the game, but it definitely still exists. The next thing is time to death is definitely still off. This is completely out of whack. It's so obvious that there are still 1 frames, there are still issues revolving around netcode, like damage. There have been times in the game where I will run around with an MP40 and I will put, you know, 6 or 7 bullets into a dude and he'll finally go down because they've, you know, changed the balancing. But then all of a sudden, I'll get killed in what feels like a split second, and that shows that 1 frames and time to death issues still exist, and it didn't change based on what they changed with time to kill. And objectively speaking, again, there is even an admission of this because they're now testing things with battle nonsense. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, that's brilliant, you know, I really hope they fix this issue. However, the fact that you've immediately decided to jump to time to death fixing after changing the time to kill is clearly an admission that you've recognized that changing the time to kill didn't actually have any effect on the time to death experience for the most part. And that's what makes it quite frustrating. The next objective criticism that I have is simply the manner in which they've pushed this. There was a small release / post on Reddit that basically said that they were going to change things, and then they kind of released the values later on, and I can kind of see why they didn't want to sort of show the numbers because they wanted people to try it before they actually released statistics, and I get that, you know, to some degree going in blind kind of makes sense, but there was no communication of this change in game. There was no communication anywhere else beyond this blog post. It just wasn't pushed by Battlefield at all. It's almost as though they didn't want people to realize they'd made the change. And, you know, what makes this even more frightening is that it was done on public servers. We have the CTE, or we have had the CTE, so to speak. You know, we quite literally have a testing environment, or we have grown as a community into making changes in the game within a test environment before we bring it public. And, you know, the fact that there isn't a Battlefield 5 CTE is strange to some degree. I can understand why they don't do it to some extent, because it is quite a lot of work. However, if you're changing a core component of the game, namely being the gunplay, surely you're testing it in public test servers before you bring it to the actual release title. Like, this entire situation and drama and problems could have been massively avoided had they literally just gone, we've made a test server on PC, try it out, let us know what you think. You know, that would have been so much simpler, it would have been so much better. Pushing a very radical change on public servers and not informing the community in-game that you've actually done that not only shifts the entire meta of the game without telling people, but it makes people very suspicious as to what they're playing in-game. Like, if you're the average Joe user who's jumped into Battlefield and all of a sudden everything feels different, surely you'd start asking questions, or you'd grow frustrated with the fact that things appear to be different without any actual communication. Now, we have had an apology. Again, we've had a Reddit post and a sort of community post in general that has apologized for the silence on time to kill. And it also says that they're going to be improving how they roll out updates and respond quickly to updates and concerns. But what doesn't make sense in this as well, and this is, I suppose, a third objective criticism, is that they are almost acknowledging the fact that they're changing time to kill for everybody except the main community of the game. So, the Reddit post says, and I quote, "We heard your feedback that many of you prefer the old TTK values with one playlist featuring only conquest using the core settings, clearly not being enough." Clearly not being enough is the phrase that stands out there. Like, you have such an overriding number of people that want to play the previous TTK values that you have to push an entire playlist live of Conquest Core and Conquest Original, and you're now going to have all the other game modes like Ground Operations be Core and Now. Like, you're going to have two separate versions of the game. And objectively speaking, we have tried so hard to stop divides down the community. Like, hardcore modes have always existed, of course, but it's very different to take what was previously the launch version of the game and then call it hardcore and bring out something else. That's very different to having the launch version of the game and then making a hardcore mode, which is what everybody anticipated. You've effectively flipped a product on its head, and to some degree, as a community member, and even just as a general user, that's incredibly frustrating and almost, I gotta say, it's really just left a sour taste. Like, you know, we had all of these blog posts and all of these videos and all of these interviews saying that the game was going to focus on bringing satisfying Battlefield 3 style gunplay to Battlefield 5. And I've got to say, that all just seems like one big lie now, because they've flipped the time to kill. And we're used to Battlefield games evolving, but changing such a massive component of the game, you know, a shooter game, you're changing the shooting to something which is absolutely not what you said it was going to be before launch, is mind-boggling in my opinion. And from a more objective standpoint, I think it's definitely going to frustrate your core player base. And I think objectively saying that you have recognized that more people want to play the core stuff and the playlist alone isn't enough is clearly an indication that you're making some bad decisions here. So again, from an objective standpoint, the data seems to be skewed. I don't think that, you know, making a time to kill change on an environment that already had bad time to death issues and netcode problems makes any sense. It's a bad environment to conduct any kind of experiment or data in an environment which is already corrupted. That's just a sort of empirical kind of thing, I guess. Objectively speaking, I think most people would say that the communication for this has been poor. I think it's been almost deceiving in a way. They've sort of tried to kind of slip this change in and to the most part hope that most people didn't notice, I think. So, you know, those are two things that I'd look at. But from a subjective standpoint, and this is when I switch into things that I think about, there are so many things that just don't make sense here. There are so many things, in my opinion, that don't make sense. And I want to point out, you know, I understand, I'm definitely a criminal of this too. I've been quite melodramatic on Twitter. And the reason for that, and I understand that some people will say, you know, that's bad, you know, you shouldn't, you know, lose your lid over this, is because the gunplay for Battlefield 5 has really been the redeeming factor of the game. You know, this is something that's been so good, in my subjective opinion, as somebody who played Battlefield 3, as somebody who's played Battlefield 4, as somebody who really loved previous iterations of the franchise that resemble very similarly in terms of time to kill. And as somebody who hated Battlefield 1 in terms of its gunplay design and everything they're doing, for me to watch Battlefield 5 go backwards towards Battlefield 1, despite advertising that it was quite literally going to do the exact opposite of that, is the most... It feels like such a kick in the teeth. Like, there are so many things that I've defended with this game. There are so many things that, you know, so many problems that people have pointed out that I've said weren't issues, like things like, you know, all the controversy they've had with some of the trailers and stuff. I've shooed that away. But when it comes to a core element of the game, which has clearly taken 2 to a year and a half to design, you know, a good chunk of time with a core development team that's based with people like Drunksy, who have quite literally said that they're trying to rebuild a Battlefield 3 style level of satisfaction. To do all of that, to within a month switch the game on its head, from a subjective standpoint, is a joke. Like, I genuinely, like, and I know a lot of people think that does sound dramatic, but the game now feels bad. Like, the game feels bad for numerous reasons that I will get into. But when you change the core component of a shooter game, being the shooting, to make it significantly worse in my subjective opinion, why would I carry on playing? Like, why would I bother? Like, the footage you're seeing today is Conquest Core because I just simply couldn't bring myself to carry on playing the newer version they've released, because there are parts of it that subjectively I think don't work, but there are objective things as well. Like, they have completely obliterated the balance in Battlefield 5, and that is an objective point. They have shifted the meta back to Battlefield 1, and that is also an objective point, and I'll dive into those shortly. But I don't know, it's left a really sour taste in my mouth at the moment using the current gunplay, especially as somebody who was so excited about the... You know, I understand this sounds a bit like, oh, fucking hell, he sounds like his dog's been shot. But, you know, for me, the gunplay was so important as somebody who had really enjoyed previous iterations back in the day of Battlefield, like 3 and 4, that this change has really just... It's just not anything I want involved in Battlefield 5. So, let's talk about some of those objective things. Let's talk about balancing. Because as much as I understand a lot of this is an opinion, you know, there are points about it that just fundamentally don't make sense. And I think those are worth pointing out more than my opinion, because you're entitled to disagree with my opinion. That's fine. But objectively speaking, there are things that just quite literally make no sense and need to be called out for their bullshit. And one of those is the balancing system in the game. It has been completely thrown out the window. The 0.85 times multiplier that they've added to the game, without snipers or shotguns for that matter, doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense on a lot of levels. I'll give you some examples. At the moment, you're probably better off using a revolver than you are using an SMG at close range. And that's not a joke, that's not me being dramatic. I genuinely had better luck with the MK4 revolver than I did with the MP40 or Sten. Because at closer ranges, it seems to be that the damage output is very similar between the two at the moment. If you're using SMGs, you may as well not. And I know that sounds, again, melodramatic, but they're terrible. They are significantly disadvantaging to any player who uses them. And, you know, the sort of rebuttal to that, I think, is a lot of people will be like, well, yeah, but the average Joe user isn't going to go bullet count. But the average Joe user will recognize meta changes. The average Joe user will notice that they're being killed by certain weapons by certain people a lot of the time, and they will then use them weapons in themselves. It is natural inclination for any shooting gamer that if I were to be killed by a really good gun repeatedly, I would go ahead and use said gun. And I think at the moment, with SMGs as weak and useless as they are, with LMGs, certain ones like the Bren for example, which have a 7 bullet time to kill, but a 30 odd something mag, which again is just not worth using, people will start picking up on that. And I've already noticed it in game, I've already noticed it very subtly. People are using explosives more, people are using fast rate of fire weapons more, people are using sniper rifles more, and people are using MMGs more. And all of this is a recognition that guns are weaker. Guns are weaker, so they're naturally looking for sources of damage elsewhere. They're looking for high rate of fire weapons like the M1907. They're looking for high rate of fire weapons like the Sten, which to some degree is okay because it's got 21, 25 odd damage now. But again, still not ideal. They're looking to weapons like SMGs, which are just, you just keep spraying. It's fine. You won't really run out of bullets, so, it doesn't matter if the bullet time to kill has changed too much. And then they're looking to sniper rifles and shotguns because they haven't changed in damage whatsoever. And I think that the other day I had a perfect example where I killed 2 medics with a sniper rifle before any of them could kill me. That's how low the damage is. And I think a lot of people focus on damage as a sort of perfect environment where you land every single bullet. We're talking about a 7-bullet time to kill, provided you land all 7 bullets. We're talking about a 4-bullet time to kill, provided you land all 4 bullets. And statistically, we know that just simply doesn't happen in-game. Accuracy levels in any given shooter tend to be below 20%. That's just how it is most of the time. So let's talk about perhaps some of the mindset behind these changes. I've given you guys my opinion. I think the old time to kill is significantly better. I think they should definitely go back to it. I think the game was designed for the old time to kill. The game was designed to work with the time to kill that they initially released for, and it isn't designed to work with the current ones. It throws things like attrition out of whack. It throws certain classes into the ground. And it seems to be like a very heavy reactionary push to the opposite direction that just doesn't work. It just simply, on certain levels, doesn't work. To certain degrees, some of that is subjective, but to most extent, most of that is objective. Certain guns just disadvantage users, and naturally those users will look elsewhere, and we'll get back closer towards the Battlefield 1 meta of people using machine guns, sniper rifles, and explosives. And that's just what will happen, and I've already seen it steadily happen in game. But let's talk about why. They want to improve the situation for more casual players. And, I totally understand that. We need the game to be commercially successful in order to have a community in the long term. We need things to do well. We need people to, adapt and get into the game previously. And I felt like Alpha 2 would have been perfectly fine for that. But they've now jumped sort of beyond Alpha 2 to a level that just doesn't seem to compute. And I think, they're really trying hard to get the casual player to enjoy it. And that's fine. But I think we've seen historically in video games where games aren't necessarily easy, where focusing on your core community is better. And I'm not saying the core community should be the direct focus of the game. I'm not saying we're entitled to a larger opinion. I'm not saying that we should have, some kind of penultimate say over everything and everything that happens. However, what I will say is that when you have a community who engages with your game as frequently as they do, and when you have a game that's been as marketed as badly as it has, surely those are the people you look to. If you're satisfying your core community members and they carry on playing your game, people will look at them. They'll be like, hey, why's that dude on my friends list playing this game? I've heard X, Y, Z about it. And they'll carry on doing that, and people will carry on doing that, and they'll keep going, oh, shit, people are talking, people are playing this, there's been this update, oh, it's free. You want to talk about important things. You want to talk about, the fact that this game has free DLC, for example. But what's ended up happening here is it's now alienated their core community, who massively seem to enjoy the original time to kill, who probably should have been focused on because they will be the people that will draw other people to the game. And I know to some extent that isn't true. There will, of course, always be that sort of, we need casual players to pick this up and play it. That's fine. But when you've managed to split your community massively down the middle and just, completely shatter most of the faith your core community has had in your game, what's the point? If you're going to alienate all the people who have stuck by you during the game's production, during the bad marketing campaign, during everything so far, why would all of a sudden they continue to back you when you make the game significantly worse? And they've been vocal about, people have been so vocal about them not changing time to kill, and they still went ahead and did it. And I think that's what makes it so inherently frustrating. And to some degree as well, I think, the telemetry that they're using also doesn't make any sense. New players will always die fast. New players will always die quickly in Battlefield. They'll die quickly in any shooter. They'll die quickly in Black Ops. They'll die quickly in Rainbow Six. They'll die quickly wherever they happen to go, whenever anybody picks up a new game. That is how it is. But what doesn't make sense is, rather than focusing on the issues which clearly will make it frustrating for the average user, they've focused on issues that the average user probably doesn't even think about too much. And there's two sides to this. So the first one is, if I'm the average user, I've got the MP28, I can't use it in server because there's a bug that says it's banned. I've got a class that says it's banned because I'm using a certain gun. I've worked really hard to unlock these weapons, but it says it's banned, so there's clearly something broken. Or you've got something like, I can't earn company coins beyond a certain rank. I've, invested a lot of time in this game. Why can't I buy skins? Blah, blah, blah. Or there's clearly netcode issues. I'm sure the average player doesn't notice netcode as much, but I think now most gamers are aware of the fact that they're getting shot around corners and things like that. And that's what they're talking about. It's like, wow, this isn't working. This is frustrating me. This gun is too overpowered. This gun is too underpowered. Those are the things the average Joe sort of thinks about. Overpowered, underpowered, and glaring bugs. And one frames, for example, are a glaring bug that still exist now. So what makes this mind-boggling is that they've decided to focus on time to kill as opposed to the things that would make that frustration level really high and stop players carrying on playing. Also, what seems incredibly nonsensical about this is that if you look around to other shooters that are popular right now, including things like Black Ops 4, fast time to kills are the new norm. They aren't a weird thing. They aren't anything different. And I think you'll ask most people, just most shooter players, if you ask them some of their favourite Call of Duty games, they'll say things like Black Ops 2 and Black Ops 1. And they'll say things like Modern Warfare 2. And they'll say things that, they'll say Battlefield 3, for example. And these games were never necessarily perfect. Some of them were unbalanced as hell, including Battlefield 3. But they were satisfying. Getting a kill in Black Ops 2 was satisfying. You had the one-shot headshots, you had the sound design come together. The same applied to Black Ops 1 as well to some extent. Modern Warfare 2, very much the same. You had that really punchy hit sound. Same with Battlefield 3, you had the head pings, you had the punchy hit sounds. And the same thing with Battlefield 5. In the previous time to kill, you had these really satisfying hit sounds, the headshot pings, everything felt gritty. And players noticed that. They won't notice messages like, oh, you'll die a little bit slower now. They won't notice messages like that, and more importantly, they'll disregard them if they still see themselves being one-framed. So, to me, I don't really know what the understanding is behind why they've made this change. I think they're trying to appease a market that A, doesn't really care about the changes they're making, or B, won't really engage with it anyway, or C, probably haven't engaged with the game because there's either no new content, or because they have had other releases come out, or because, Battlefield isn't their favourite franchise. And there's so many reasons why player churn would be high, and there's so many reasons why players will pick up the game and not carry on playing, including bugs in-game and including things externally. And pointing towards time to kill is the reason why all of this is going inherently wrong, and radically changing gunplay, which most of your core community would consider to be the most satisfying feature of your game, and likely in turn I imagine lots of average players would also agree that they really like their weapons. It is mental. I don't see the methodology behind it. I don't think changing the time to kill is actually going to save them very much, and to some degree it feels very commercial. It feels very, very commercial. They're doing an A/B test. They're doing a test which basically says, we want new players over Christmas to sort of carry on playing because they're dying less or they're dying more slowly and they feel like, they're okay. And plenty of players will pick up the game over Christmas. And if they die slower and they die less frequently, they might carry on because they're a little bit less frustrated. However, it's completely madness to do this on live servers. It doesn't make any sense to do it live servers in-game, and more importantly, like I said, with so many other issues that would inherently piss off the average gamer, changing the time to kill, I don't get it. Because the idea behind it is that you change the time to kill so people carry on playing your game because they notice they're dying less. But if they considered the norm to be dying quickly in the first place, and they already know that, then if you're talking about a community which you don't think engages with the game very much, they probably won't notice. They probably won't notice that they're dying more slowly now. It won't make a difference to them. And I think the big sort of kick in the teeth behind all of this is a big change which alienates the main community of the game that will carry on, you know, but aims to appease a non-vocal part of the community that may not necessarily stay for reasons beyond the time to kill. So, that's about it for my video today on time to kill. Talk to me in the comment section below. I know some of this is subjective. I know there are plenty of things you can disagree with me with, but there are a lot of it, like the way this has all been executed, that just simply doesn't make any sense, and I think deserves to be called out pretty badly. And yeah, you know, I'm going to carry on playing Battlefield 5, but core. I don't think I'm going to mess around with the new stuff because it just feels bad. And I hope they go back to the old TTK. That's the only thing I can hope for at the moment, because I think they're making a massive mistake. And I you know, honestly, I reckon they might just switch it back after Christmas. And if they do that, well, I think A, they'll create even more problems because they fucked around with the meta again. And B, I think it will very much consolidate this decision as not an intelligent gameplay decision, but as a commercial decision, which is what I think this is in the first place. So, anywho, that's about it from me today. As always, folks, thank you for watching, and I will see you again in another video soon.